and welcome to a Fun Day Friday video. I've run into a problem recently. I am in a massive reading slump, and it is just frustrating me to the point of screaming. There have been several books that I've started that arguably I am interested in. I just can't focus on and read right now. So to try and deal with this problem, I have definitely looked towards a series that is rapidly becoming a staple in my growing personal library, let's say. And this series is actually really interesting because it's a non-fiction series. I've got only a couple of the books here. These are the ones that I just have on my shelf right now that I've pulled off. So they're not the ones including the storage. But this is the Brief History of series of books. And what it is each of these is actually on a different topic. So the ones I've pulled off my shelf are A Brief History of the Crusades, A Brief History of King Arthur, A Brief History of Kubla Khan, A Brief History of the Universe, and then A Brief Guide to Secret Religions. And this one, you notice, it's a slightly different name. It's part of the same series, but what's really cool about these is it does recognize that some of these are ongoing. So you're going to have a brief guide of ongoing things and a brief history of things that we're reflecting upon. Now, some people might argue, why is it a brief history of the universe? The universe is obviously ongoing, but this is a brief history of the way humans have reflected on the universe. So it does go up to a point, and then recognizes there's more stuff happening, but they can't really talk about it here. The secret religions, well, those are a little more stable than thoughts on the universe type deal. So I really love this series for a couple big reasons. First and foremost, because this has been a continual way of me to actually break my reading slumps. For example, despite the slump I'm in now, I have successfully finished A Brief History of Kubla Khan very recently. If you're curious, this is a grandson of Genghis Khan, and arguably a unifier of China. He became a Chinese emperor, though it's a good deal more complicated than that. So this is a really good series to start digging into certain subjects without necessarily having to get too deep. When you take a look at these books, like, these are massive topics, but you'll notice none of these books are, like, overly long. I can definitely pull out both fiction and non-fiction books that I have that are significantly longer than these ones. And that's because these books are going to give you just a taste of the topic. They're going to give you the broad strokes, the broad overview, and then give you what you need to dig further. They're going to point you towards primary sources, secondary sources. The notes are always fantastic, I find, especially if you want to get into even simple things like the chronology that's happening, but also, again, sources and further reading is available in the back of each of these texts. So really super useful, I find, in that moment where I think I might be interested in a topic, but I'm not really sure. Grabbing A Brief History of or A Brief Guide to is going to give me the sense of whether I really want to do some further reading, if I want to narrow that topic to a certain person or a certain section of this history, and why that might be interesting for me. There are definitely times where I've gotten my fill of the topic, at least for right now, and I'm good to go on to something else. Other times, well, let's put it this way. A Brief History of King Arthur is one of the first Arthurian books I picked up. Now, this was definitely a topic that I had an interest in, but it was a question of where I could go from here and how interested I honestly was. And I am interested. I want more of King Arthur. Give me King Arthur, all of the King Arthur. And surprisingly, a lot more on the non-fiction end. Discussions of even fictional texts in a more academic manner, but also the question of, was he, wasn't he, what history can we find, is definitely an interest of mine. So having picked this up as the first A Brief History of that I ever read turns out it was really helpful. And since then, I've just started collecting these texts whenever I get the chance to, because they're on so many topics. And you're suddenly wondering, how can somebody know about all these topics? This is not like a fiction series where all the books are written by one author. This is a very broad series where each book is written by an expert in the field, somebody who studied it before, and somebody who's often written on the subject. For example, again, didn't realize it immediately, but one of my other favorite King Arthur texts is actually also written by Mike Ashley, who wrote A Brief History of King Arthur. So you don't really have to be worried about whether or not somebody can know all of these things. They are bringing experts in for each of the texts. And again, it's going to give you the beginning of things. You're not necessarily going to dig deep into everything, because most of these books can have multiple texts where you're going to learn different things from all of them. It's a starting point, and I really do want to stress that it is a starting point. Now, because they are all written by different authors, there are going to be some differences in flow, narrative, and focus. So that is something you have to keep in mind. And this might not necessarily be the place that you're going to if you're already really well read in the field. I find it a good starting point, but because of how brief they honestly have to keep it, there is going to be some nuances that aren't dug into as often as maybe you feel they should be. So start here, maybe don't finish here. Though I will say that, again, with the idea of start here, don't finish here, I think these would be really good sort of intro texts, especially if you've got some academics topic coming up that you want to start understanding and then starting to find the text that you should be referencing to. For example, I have definitely seen some brief histories that I am going to pick up on topics such as slavery. So that's going to be really good for giving me a sense of especially primary sources I should be going to and other academic secondary sources. So, like I said before, start here and then spread out. But it's also okay because, again, these texts are going to give you a sense if these topics are something you're interested in continuing to read. It turns out that, hey, maybe you thought you liked King Arthur and then turns out you don't really have a place you want to go from here. That's perfectly okay too. And none of these books are really going to give you that sense that you've been slogging through everything. At least I haven't gotten that sense. And then gone out the other side with nothing to gain. They certainly are going to teach you something, but it's going to be in a short enough span of pages that you're not thinking that you've wasted all this time on it and you have nothing to show. It's a good and let's go. With that, I find it really good for my reading slumps precisely because of the size of the text. For the most part, none of these chapters are so overly long that I'm feeling, again, like I'm slogging through it and it's a never-ending road to nowhere. If I need to take a break, a chapter ending is close enough that I can finish it up and keep going. That's another big reason that I actually honestly really like nonfiction, is oftentimes I use them as something like a commute book, or I've got to hang around for an hour before work starts because of how the buses work. And I can pick up a nonfiction book, read a bit, learn a bit, and away we go for the rest of the day. A Brief History of and A Brief Guide to have been one of my favorite series to do this with because of the size, because of the general overview of everything, and because I know if I want to keep reading on the subject, that they've got those sections in the back for sources and further reading. So I can actually go in there, pick out some texts I want to find those texts, and then keep reading in more depth than what my commute book would allow me to do. Oftentimes with fiction books, I'm not getting this opportunity, and also oftentimes with nonfiction books that are much larger, so they're harder to carry around with you and get going, and oftentimes I'm going to lose my place if I am starting and stopping. I have never had that problem with A Brief History of and Brief Guide to series. There are so many of these that you're going to inevitably find one on a topic that you like. It's just a question of finding them. That's sort of the weird thing about this series, is how do you find them? And how do you put them on your bookshelves? This was a question I had for several people as I was trying to set up these shelves, and I think I'm going to rethink my answer as I reset up my shelves when I'm moving, which is very soon. Because do you put them all together? They are a series after all, or do you put them with other books on those topics? Do you find them with other books on the topics, or in a series of some sort? The answer for the second one, at least, I have never found these all put together in a bookshelf, and in fact most of these I've picked up secondhand. So finding them in some place like Chapters or Indigo hasn't actually really worked out for me. It's definitely been a second-hand thing that I found, though some of them, such as A Brief History of the Universe, I have actually managed to find at a well-known bookstore. Going forward from here, I'm going to keep collecting these. These are just some of my favorite ones to let me dig into the subject, and they're definitely ones I would then recommend to people if they were thinking, okay, I want to start in on a certain topic. My favorite one for sure is King Arthur, because this one gives a sense of really where a bunch of the Arthurian legends came from. So all of the people that mention it briefly, such as Gildelas and Nennius, but also a question of the Welsh tradition, the creation of Arthur through Geoffrey of Monmouth, whether or not there was a real Arthur, really things like that. So yeah, this is a series I really like. It's hard to get into it because they're all so individual. So like I said, you're never gonna find this series and decide none of them are for you. You're interested in Robin Hood, there's one of those two. You're interested in huge sweeping events in history that you just want really a condensed version before you go any further, we've got that. So, if you're looking for a place maybe to start into nonfiction, I would definitely encourage A Brief Guide to and A Brief History of series, especially if you're just used to fiction and you're not sure where you want to start, what subject you might be interested. Just grab a condensed version and figure it out from there. And if you really do like fiction and you want to start nonfiction, then grab a brief history of one of your favorite nonfiction tropes, characters like King Arthur or Robin Hood, and find out where those stories are actually coming from. It is well worth the journey, and again, with this book size, you're never going to have an overly expensive text, and you're never going to invest so much time in it that even if you don't like the subject, you feel like you have to finish, you feel like you were wrong for DNFing, or you were feeling wrong for reading it. Either way, you're going to get through, or not, and know yourself better on the other side. And know a topic a little bit better on the other side. I really like this series, and I don't think it gets enough love for the fact that I can hardly find any of these when I go looking for them in like a not used bookstore. I continually look for them when I am in the used bookstores. So give them some love, try out a new subject or two, and I will see you on the other side. Have fun reading!